Hey, welcome to this edition of the John Papaloni Show. Today I have special guest Serena Holmes. Serena,
Hello.
welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So I want to start off the show with the way I start off every show,
Okay.
which is you telling us about who you are, what you do, and how you got here.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously we're both realtors, but I'm actually fairly new in terms of being a realtor. I had run my own business, which I guess we know each other indirectly through that. I ran my own events company called Tigress for 18 years, and I ended up selling that, kind of merging with another agency last February so I could focus on real estate full time. And I had been actually trying to sell that throughout the pandemic. I listed it for sale, I think 3 weeks before we went into lockdown. So good luck selling a company like that during a pandemic. But, a few months into our first lockdown, I decided to enroll for my real estate license because it was complementary to all of the real estate investing I was already doing. And, it took some time to get that done. And then between the courses, I was going through rounds of editing for my book. So I just kind of would rotate course editing. And then at the end of the year, I had my book done and published, and I had my real estate license. So I just kind of kicked things off kind of part-time at the beginning of last year, and then now I've been able to focus on it more full-time heading into this year.
That is awesome. And see, it's funny, right? Because like you said, when you're running an event company and then COVID hits and we go to full lockdown and it's it's for sale when nothing's open,
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. But
bad timing.
yeah, for real.
Yeah.
So where my question is that why did you decide you wanted out?
Yeah, so I just had my daughter in December of 2019, so she was just a few months going into that lockdown, but the girl that I had actually promoted and trained to be my mat leave replacement, who had for 6 years on my team, resigned when my daughter was just 2 months old. So at that time, our company was, not huge, but fairly decent size. We had 10 of us full-time and about 2,200 part-time across Canada and some in the States. So I think I just panicked, how was I supposed to have this baby at home? And then my goal and my focus was to hopefully have support during that year so I could, be with my family, and then all of that went sideways. So I hired a mergers and acquisitions company who went through valuing the business, and, they even had a buyer lined up, and then welcome COVID. So I just kept things going throughout. I let my whole team go except for one person, and I just kept her so that way I could scale up during times that we were allowed to operate. And when we weren't, she just blogged her little heart out and updated company documents and kind of found work to do. But I wanted to make sure that I had someone that could support us going through it, just because we would scale back up when we were out of lockdown for 3-4 months, then back in and all of that. But she ended up resigning a year ago last January. So at that point in time, this company had 2 years to try to sell Tigress and had been unsuccessful. I even gave them a list of agencies in Toronto that I thought could just assimilate us and could see value in our website and the leads that came in. And that didn't lead to anything. So I basically asked for a mutual release. And then I talked to, I think, 12 or 14 agencies. I had 6 interested and 4 offers in 2 weeks. And then we closed 2 weeks after that. So it was very quick at that point.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that.
Mm-hmm.
But the big question now is that you decided to get into real estate.
Yeah.
So why real estate out of all things?
Yeah, so like I said, I'd been real estate investing for about 10 years already. So it just felt like, I was passionate about the industry in general, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much power they have in the equity within their own home. So I was kind of using the Smith maneuver before I even knew what the Smith maneuver was. We renovated our current home, forced appreciation, opened up a big HELOC, and I used that to buy my first rental property in Florida, and then doubled that money, paid off my home mortgage 4 years later. My HELOC went up significantly, and then I was able to use that to start really investing. I bought 2 pre-construction properties. I invested in land development. I invested in syndicated mortgages and all these different things. And I've literally been able to develop enough passive income that I was living off that during COVID because my company had no money coming in. Obviously, I didn't want to take money out. So I just think that I look at it from a different lens of a regular realtor that's just buying and selling. I can look at it and say, well, have you thought about it from this perspective or that perspective in terms of investing and how they can create, whether it's passive income or create that path towards financial freedom. So it's obviously different. With my business, I was business to business. When you're selling houses, you're business to consumer. So some situations are very emotionally charged. It's a very different experience dealing with people in those situations. So I think, if I could choose, I would like to focus more on commercial, and I would like to focus on something like, identifying land development opportunities and things that, I would be more B2B. But I'm kind of working on going down that path.
Well, that's fascinating, right? Because most people get in it, and the first thing they do is, I want to sell houses, I want to sell people's homes, and everybody uses the same lines, like, where, it's the biggest investment they're ever going to make, and it's like as if the person buying it didn't know that, but, and it's usually repetitive and kind of the same lines, where you're kind of taking it to a different viewpoint.
Yeah, two different viewpoints. So there's the investment side, and when I started my my Instagram page and my marketing, it was before I could even work. Like, my daughter wasn't even in daycare yet, and my approach was, what does that really represent? So there's real estate, there's houses, but when you think about home, there's this emotional attachment to it. So, like, what do you do at home? Like, you eat, you sleep, you relax, you play. It's specifically within your own house, but also the community that you're in. So I started just sharing content from other people that would resonate with all of those different things, because I wanted to share stuff people would find interesting. I didn't just want to be like, listed, sold. Like, that's boring. Like, yes, it shows that you're busy, but it's not necessarily stuff that people want to see. So I just tried to develop content that I thought homeowners would be more emotionally attached to and find interesting and would give value to them.
I love your content that way, right? Because I have the same feeling as you, like the just sold, just listed, waste of time. In fact, to be honest, out of the last 5 transactions that I've done, I think I've only posted 1 on Instagram. I mean, if you go through my social media, it looks like all I'm doing is podcasting. Like, it's like I don't sell real estate anymore. But it's like, you know what? I don't really care to promote the just sold, just listed, any of that crap, because like you said, it's boring. Right? Where I find if you provide value and education, that's more valuable to the person.
And it's thought leadership, right? So
exactly. That's exactly it, right? So I love that thought process, and I'm exactly doing the same thing. I might be doing a little too much podcasting and not enough of anything else, but hey, you know what? Got to start somewhere. So
for sure.
So with that being said, like, what you're with, I believe, EXP, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Out of did you interview other brokerages, or did you go straight there? Like, what was your process, and how did you choose the brokerage?
I interviewed a lot. So when I first got my license, I interviewed with, I think, 8 or 9 brokerages in total. And some of them were teams, and I was very interested. Like, I like the concept of a team, but I was worried that their expectation on time would be more than I had to give. Because again, my daughter was still very young. We didn't have plans to put her in daycare till she was about 2 years old. And at that time, I felt like I could maybe give 20 or 30 hours a week, and they wanted like 50, 60. So none of the teams that I met with could really work with me in that capacity. So the real estate brokerage I joined at that time had very low fees compared to other like larger franchise kind of brokerages, like maybe 20% of what some of them would charge. I don't want to name names. Right. And they seemed like they had a really robust training program. And it feels like, you probably know this with brokerages, it's like the Wild West. Like, everyone has different ways of how they train people, how they do different things. So I joined this one particular brokerage, and I think they kind of overstated what the training would be. And what I found coming out of the program, I ran my own business for almost 20 years. I'm resourceful. I can figure things out. But the program teaches you, what has to happen and not how. So I was very fortunate to connect to a realtor who had, 30 years experience. We spent, 2 hours on a Zoom call and just went through all the hows. So, okay, I have a listing now. What exactly do I do? And that brokerage was kind of, just wanted you to use your admin. But I'm if it's 10 o'clock at night and I need to do something, I really want to know how to do it. And I literally developed my own playbook just so I could document all of these different things that the program at Humber doesn't really teach you. You learn by doing, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I've even shared that with other new realtors, because I'm where would you otherwise find this? I had one question from a client that no one could answer. I called Treb 3 times. I called my brokerage 3 times. I called 4 other realtors I knew. No one knew the answer. So when I got that answer, you can be sure, that's very thoroughly detailed in my playbook. And what I found was that, from a management perspective, I wasn't really comfortable with the person that they had responsible. And I found that if I asked a few questions, I would be lucky to get one vague answer back. And I just found that to be very frustrating. So when the time came that my schedule opened up and I knew I could be more active, I started to explore other brokerages. And to be honest, EXP wasn't totally on my radar. I thought there was some value brand brokerage. And the reason being is that someone sold a house around the corner from me, and their sign was just really flimsy. And the guy never came to get it after the house sold. So at one point it was even upside down at the tree. And I was I don't know, that was kind of my impression of it. And then I actually met with a couple groups within EXP, and it just blew me away. Like, they had all these things that if all things are considered equal, it felt like you're paying less to be part of them, but you're getting so much more. So if you hit 16 transactions, you get your full cap back in stock options. There's agent attraction opportunities. Like, one of the biggest realtors there, he's not even transacting anymore because he's gone from 300,000 as a realtor to 3 million a year from agent attraction. So there was just all of these different unique opportunities, but I think you have to be very comfortable. Either you join a team and you know you've got that support, or you can be very comfortable working like one-on-one, and I still have support if I need it, but it's not like, you know, you walk into your brokerage office and you've got a spot to sit, and it's different. So you kind of have to network and build relationships in a different way. So
Absolutely. And that's the other thing I wanted to point out, right? Like, there's no single cup for everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody, what works for one person may not work for the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that knows me, I've kind of rotated through the brokerages. I've kind of tried them all. And I usually end up back where I started, so which is where I am right now.
Yeah.
And again, that's because it works for me.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Right. So again, you found a place that jives with you.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you pretty much started off trying to figure it out, and you kind of took it slowly, kind of trying to discover it, and you didn't worry too much. You did what worked for you.
Yeah.
And then when you were ready to ramp up, then you kind of took that next step.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to start.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of business, like, what areas do you focus on?
Yeah, so I'm in Pickering, so ideally I'd like to focus on that. So the last listing I had was in Rosebank. I'm working with a buyer right now who's looking like Pickering, Ajax, and Whitby. So, I mean, not to say I've turned down things. Like, last year it felt like all my clients were Mississauga, but, you know, obviously that's far. Like, I remember dropping off a closing gift for one of my clients, and it took 3.5 hours round trip because there was like every possible thing, like construction, accidents, weather, going there and back. So obviously, like, that wouldn't be great, but that's where the opportunity was. You know, those people came out of my existing database. So it was like a past staff member, someone that I'd been on her podcast at one point in time. So they'd been getting my newsletters. So you kind of take those opportunities, but obviously I'd prefer to focus something closer to home. And then just if I can work towards things from a commercial standpoint, that would be my preference as well.
Makes sense. Now, you brought up a good point, right? Like, you have like a regimen. Like, so, like, what is your daily schedule? Like, how do you promote yourself? Like, what do you, Here, let's start off. I'm asking you 1,000 questions before you even answer one. Let's start off with the first question is, what would your typical day look like? Yeah.
So, ever since I had my daughter, I've been pretty, like, since she was maybe 4 months old and started sleeping through the night, I'm pretty dedicated to working out. So I strive for like 5 to 6 days a week. And the reason being, honestly, is for energy. Like, I feel like if the days that I don't, I'm dragging. So I just have to make sure I commit to that for myself. The beauty is that we have a fairly large home. Like, we have a 5-level back split. So my gym's like steps from her playroom. So when she's up, like, I can multitask and stuff like that. And usually during that time when I'm putting in the cardio, used to be when I would do all my social posting to get it out of the way. Obviously, a lot of the platforms have changed the rules. So now it's, you know, time of day matters. So I'll often prepare certain things, but then I may post to Instagram like later in the day. Once my daughter's off to daycare, then my day can take many different forms. It just depends on what I have going on. But the marketing is a big part of it. Like, ideally, I would like to attract those clients that see a synergy in working together rather than maybe like door knocking or spending a lot of money and time on online leads and stuff like that.
Makes sense. Now, with that being said, do you use a CRM?
Yes. Well, EXP has their own CRM. So with EXP in particular, they give you your website. I have 2 websites. So I have their website and a WordPress website, and then they also have KV Core. So basically the fee is just their software licensing. So you're not paying like a regular monthly brokerage fee.
Right. Yeah. So with that being said, you are using the CRM. You're sending newsletters. How often do you send them?
I send them the first day of every month. So I usually, again, try to focus on something for buyers, something for sellers, and something from an investment standpoint. Usually I'll share a video, and then again, going back to like the eat, sleep, relax, and play, like I'll share something around that and rotate those topics. So it's around, I think, 5 pages. So I just try to have like a little something for everything and something for everyone, and something that I think people will find interesting.
Makes sense. I love that. So the other thing that caught my attention here is how you immediately went into what we call the sphere of influence to find business, right?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times people get into the business and they think that they're going to make a Instagram post And at
everyone's
that
going
point,
to come.
that's exactly where I
Yeah.
was going with it, right? So that's exactly what people think, right? I'm just going to put 1 or 2 Instagram
Yeah.
posts. People are going to come. My phone's going to ring off the hook.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have time for anything. I'm going to need to hire somebody on the 3rd day of business.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, they're discouraged 3 weeks in.
Yeah.
And then it's always the same question. And they go calling around everybody in the brokers and saying, how do you guys get leads?
Yeah.
Oh, how's business? What are you guys doing? They're not really interested. They're trying to figure out why their phone's not ringing.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, because let's be honest, this is not an easy business.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I'm grateful that I have all this passive income, so it's not like I'm depending on what I'm making as a realtor to pay my bills. And in fact, anything I do make, I just want to buy assets with. So that's really my focus with that. What I would say is that I did try to talk to other realtors that I thought were successful in my brokerage when I started to see like what went well for them. So I did invest in 2 different lead gen programs early on that had a good reputation. One of them a very bad experience with because they sent out an email to my database and they didn't use the content that I provided. So it caused a lot of confusion with people when they got it. And I had people like very upset. Like I had 4 or 5 very angry phone calls. I probably got 10 or 15 very angry emails. And I was able to use that as grounds to get out of their contract because it was very poorly handled. And I would say out of the leads I was getting from them, say I was getting 50 or 60 a month, probably half were bogus. And out of all of them, only 1 led to a client, which is a client I'm working with right now on the buy side. I also tried 5 months of mail outs in a couple neighborhoods close to me, and I literally got 1 phone call, and that was my listing in January. So when you think about the money that goes into that, like I probably spent $15,000 to $20,000 between the lead gen programs and the mail outs, and I got 2 solid, like it actually led to 2 clients, but that's expensive. So I think if you start with the people that you already know, like I have, thousands of clients I've worked with, I have staff that I've worked with, I have personal relationships. So I think as a new realtor, you start with that before you start spending all of this money on people you don't know, because it's going to be a lot harder to convert them.
Boom, mic drop moment, right? And I believe that. It's because people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people feel that, oh, well, I don't know anyone. I don't know who to talk to. My family won't buy, or, and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that we know a lot more people than we think we know. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, people get their hair done. I mean, I may be the exception, but in general, people go and get their hair done.
Yeah.
A barber or a hairstylist or, you go to what other services you get. Like everywhere you go, you're meeting people.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect time to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
So, and then you can build your database from that, which is incredible. And, and that's the way to start off. So, getting to know people so they know, like, and trust. And you had a former business where they know you. A lot of people have had a lot of good experiences. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure there's obviously the odd one that didn't have a good experience because nothing is 100% in life. But no, you can't worry about that. You just keep moving forward.
Yeah, for sure.
So I absolutely love that. I love your take on that. So with that being said, and I like how you said, don't go and spend a fortune in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because I should have had this conversation with you when I started.
Yeah.
Because my first year, believe it or not, are you ready for it?
Like
I spent $65,000.
Yeah.
And you know how many sales I made with that $65,000?
Maybe a couple.
Zero.
Oh.
I mean, not unless you count my brother and my brother and another family member.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I know why I did it. Like I had some money obviously from my business, but I didn't have the time. I didn't have the time to like go out and door knock. My daughter was only in daycare 3 days a week. And honestly, the biggest challenge when she started was that she was getting sick constantly. Like, that was no joke. Like, people say daycare germs, like, I thought they were exaggerating. And I'm not kidding. Like, we were sick for 8 or 9 months straight. So every time she got sick, I got sick. So I couldn't be out door knocking in the height of COVID. So it made sense. Like, okay, well, let's try these lead gen systems that came highly recommended. Let's try the mail. It's like, let's try these things because I was trying to attract the people to me in a way that didn't require quite as much time for me to be physically present to go to main networking events were obviously not back then. They've kind of come back around. But at the time I was trying to, be mindful of what my commitments were and use the time that I had. But it honestly was not the greatest use of resources. So.
Of course. So with that being said, now what would say was your biggest challenge once you started? Like, once you started rolling and things started happening, you had your formula working. I mean, we all have clients, some of them that are problem clients, some of them that are very easy to deal with. But sometimes what happens is we even get the right client, but then we run into a situation we actually did not expect. I mean, you're like, ooh, now what?
Yeah.
And you don't want the client to know that you're processing like they're processing, because you're supposed to know.
Yeah.
Right? And but we're human, right? We got to learn this stuff.
Yeah.
What was that challenging moment for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my biggest learning experience, there was a realtor that I was supporting, and I think he had some unfair expectations where he was kind of like, okay, like he wanted me to actually help with a lot of different things. Like, if he had buyers that were interested in his listings, he wanted me to show the properties, run errands for him, and we developed kind of like a general arrangement that he would pay me for helping him on certain things. And then he thought by mentoring me, he wanted a percentage of my commission on the first however many deals. And I discovered very quickly he was someone I couldn't trust. There was 2 instances where he owed me money and he tried to kind of backpedal on our agreement. So I just tried to distance myself from him. And then when I finally said, like, listen, I'm not comfortable with our arrangement, he was very unhappy about that, even though I'd done far more than him, like for him, than he'd done for me. Like, I think he let me watch him work on a marketing presentation on Zoom for like half an hour. And he also let me watch him like add initials to an agreement. Like, it was very incremental.
Yeah.
He felt like his time was worth like thousands of dollars. That was kind of a joke. He went back to the owner of our brokerage, like, to complain, and he wanted like compensation and all these different things. So that was challenging and really surprising also. Like, I just, I mean, I think the brokerage owner maybe was just trying to keep him happy because he is a top producer, but there were some things I learned through that. But when I did finally land my first listing, I decided to list with another woman in my brokerage that had a lot of experience, because I thought, this is my first time. I want to make sure I understand how to do everything. It goes smoothly. And that didn't necessarily protect me either. Like, I had a client that expected me to pay for a lot of different things. So every time she wanted me to pay for things, she would bring up her dad's realtor who she felt like would provide those things. Like, I paid for staging, I paid for storage, I paid for cleaning, I paid for like a lot of things. And I think altogether the bill was about $7,000. But my biggest learning was that I should have had a Schedule A to indicate if she decided not to sell or the house didn't sell, like, she's responsible for those costs. And again, because I was working with this other realtor, like, she never said anything, and I didn't know about a Schedule A at that point in time. It was my very first listing. So ultimately, she ended up taking the house off the market because her expectations on the price were higher than what the comps were allowing for. And we did get offers, but she turned them down, took the house off the market, and then ultimately I ended up out of pocket on those costs. So I think that was my biggest learning. And even the client I had past that, like, I shouldered $15,000 in renovations for them. But I had a Schedule A that was very detailed. It started with $5,000, that climbed. And then as it climbed, like, I'd have them re-sign it based on the additional budget and stuff like that. But they were very different people. I think they were very grateful for my help because they wouldn't be able to do those things and get it ready to be in the shape that it needed to be without my help. So I learned obviously from that first client, because the next client was even a much, much larger budget in terms of support. But it was just stuff I didn't expect people to have those expectations of me to that level. So now I've learned kind of how to handle that.
So with that being said, now Bob Smith or Alice Smith, whichever, is thinking about selling their home.
Yeah.
And they're going to reach out to you. So, and they're not sure what they need to do, what forms they need, or anything that they, they basically got an idea, and they have a general idea of what they think they should sell the home for.
Yeah.
But they want to consult with a professional. So now they're calling you. What is the process, with someone dealing with you and getting the home on the market? Yeah.
I mean, obviously you want to go see the home and see what kind of shape that it's in. Because as I've learned, like, not always like in the shape that they need to be. I think one challenge I've found is that some sellers really are stuck on that mindset of what they think they could have gotten last year, and they feel like they should still be getting that now. So I think if I have someone that's not willing to accept what the comps look like, and they're not willing to be a bit flexible, like, it's probably not the best client to take on, because you're going to just waste time and money getting things ready. Obviously, you'll look at the comps, try to take into consideration where their home stacks up. But I have found over and over, there are a lot of clients that, they think their home's worth $200,000 to $300,000, like, ahead of really what the comps are reflecting.
Right. That's true, right? And I think we all experience that. It's kind of madness. But now the market has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of bidding wars.
Absolutely.
Not sure.
Same. Yeah. I mean, of course it's shifted. Like, I had a listing that, at the time the comps were a little below 1.2. The sellers wanted 1.5. And I just said, okay, like, let's just test it. The house was in good shape. It wasn't difficult to get it to list. And over the span of the 2 months, like, we were getting interest around 1.3, 1.375, 1.44. We literally got an offer at 98% of list price the last day of their listing. They turned it down. And then the buyer came back 2 days later at list, and they turned it down again. So that was challenging, and there's obviously some other things happening, but we got from below 1.2 to 1.5 in the span of about 2.5 to 3 months. So I think the market's definitely spun around. So just sometimes you have to be patient.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you got into real estate because you're an investor yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you like investing. What type of properties interest you?
Yeah, so I'm working on actually trying to figure out what my next investment should be. So that's kind of gave myself a year to figure out where to go next. So I'm considering partnering with someone that has experience burring multifamily properties because there is such a big opportunity to see a lift. There's potentially turnkey properties that are multifamily as well. So I've been kind of looking in the East Coast because they do cash flow better out there. I've even looked in like Tulum, Tamarindo, Florida, like literally just keeping my options open. But I do a lot of private lending. So I'll invest with real estate investors that are either involved in land development or renovations and stuff like that. And they all offer pretty high monthly returns. So most of the deals that I do are between 15 to 18%. So for example, if you put $50,000 into a deal, the payment's like $708 interest only, and then you'll get the payment back in full by the end of the term. Sometimes they're principal and interest. In other cases, it could be bridge loans. So at any one time, usually I have 18 to 20 of those going on. And that's what, I basically live on, and more than live on. Like, it's actually paid off other investments that I've done, like land development with my TFSA and syndicated mortgages and stuff like that.
Good for you. That's actually quite good. I loved it, and I love how you mentioned Florida, considering I just got back from Florida.
Yeah.
But no, honestly speaking, that's exactly the kind of thing that interests me. I'm into investments as well. Mm-hmm. And right now I've started my company. It's called Papaloni Capital.
Nice.
I'm sure you know where I'm going with it, right? Multi-residential.
Yeah.
I'm working on syndicated mortgages as well.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So that's right in my area.
And the beauty of Florida, which obviously they're far more landlord friendly. So I was in a workshop this past weekend, and they said that usually you get 75% of tenants who haven't paid out within a week, and you can get about 100% out within 30 days. So compared to here, where you could have a tenant for a year or longer, I have a client like that's wanted to sell her house for a year, and she can't get her tenant out. And she finally got her LTB ruling, and they've given them till the end of August. So when you talk about like where the properties make sense to me, like I want to be somewhere that's landlord friendly and has an opportunity to cash flow.
I am thinking exactly the same thing. All right, like I have clients sometimes, and I blow them away with my answer. Right? They say, "What do you think I should buy in Toronto?" Your primary home. Yeah. And they're like, "Okay, no, I meant for investment." You don't. Yeah. And they're like, "What?" I go, "Get into commercial," because it doesn't have those restrictions, right? Because just dealing with the landlord and tenant board here is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in that that mess. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it just freaks people out when I say, don't buy a home in Ontario. Yeah. Or for a rental, right?
And people feel nervous about the fact that they may not be close to it, but that's where your property manager comes in, right? So I bought in Florida for my first rental. My second two were Edmonton and Langley, but I was specifically couldn't go any further, but I specifically chose stuff that wasn't in Ontario. So you hire a property manager, and sometimes that involves a little management. Like with my long-term rental in Edmonton, my electricity bill was going through the roof. So it went from $300 to $1,800 in the span of 3 months. And I'd had it for 3 years already, so I knew that this was abnormal. So I'm, of course, wondering what kind of weed they're growing in the basement. But the challenge was that the property manager took a while to go in. So it took them 3 months to finally go in. And as it turned out, they had a giant space heater in the garage because it gets so cold in Edmonton, they're worried that their cars would die and they wouldn't be able to go to work in the morning. So that was just blew the electricity like crazy. So obviously they ended up paying for it. We figured it out, but it took 3 months to get them in to go in and take a look.
Wow, but there you go, right? So, and I agree with you. And this is why I like also multiplexes. Yeah. Right. I love when you have multiple rents, because if you have one or two people not paying, and you're in a fiveplex, then you have 3 people to cover the bills. Yeah. Right. So it's not like you're where if you have a single home, you have one person, at most 2 people.
Yeah.
And usually the basement's lower than the upstairs.
Yeah.
If you have it in a single family home, and neither of them usually cover the mortgage.
Yeah.
Like, so you kind of need them both.
Yeah.
To have a, so it's more risky. So and a lot of times people say, well, multiplexes cost more. Yeah, they do, but it's easier to get approval when you over 5 doors.
Yeah.
You're no longer based on you.
I don't think people realize that. That's one thing I wish I knew back when I first started investing. That wasn't on my radar. And I thought at the time, well, if I can only qualify for this much, like what can I buy? But looking back, had I gotten a multifamily, I'd probably still have that today, as opposed to like the path I took at the time, just based on the knowledge that I had. But I saw a speaker on the weekend, and what he said is the problem with a single family home is there's too many leaks. So if you think you have one rent payment, maybe two, well, you've got utilities, taxes, mortgage, all of these different things. Well, if you have a 12-plex, so one person moves out, it's not like you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage. So I think that's what people don't necessarily consider. And you're obviously, like you said, you're looking at the income of the property, not your personal income to qualify. So it may take longer, but it's technically easier in that respect.
1,000%, right? And I agree with you. And I've done a lot of stupid moves in my time too, because of lack of knowledge, right? Like,
well, it's not as stupid. At least you started. I think that's the most important thing, right?
And that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, the key component is, nothing in life is a failure unless you do nothing about it. When you quit and you give up, that is the failure.
And if you don't learn from it.
Well, that's my point, right? So if something doesn't work out and you find something else or find a way to fix it, then you've learned something from it. So it wasn't a failure, it was a learning lesson.
Absolutely.
So, and I love that, right? I mean, I recently got my mortgage license as well, so I'm dual licensed.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I actually learned a lot by getting that license, like stuff and ins and outs that I didn't know, even as a realtor, although I've been a realtor for like 8 years now.
Yeah.
So, and that's fascinating, right? Just fascinating how the finances work.
Yeah.
And you would never imagine how some of the reasons things get turned down. It's like, wow. So, but where I'm going with this is with your investments and in terms of loans and stuff and finances, what was your biggest struggle and what was your biggest success?
Yeah. So when I initially, I joined a real estate education company back in 2018, and my company had been staffing their events. So I didn't know a lot about what they do. There's a very well-known face of that business that people would be familiar with. But at the time, they very heavily advocated for this one particular company for syndicated mortgages. And my consultant's like, you could use your whole HELOC. You could be making this much money. And, I invested about $350,000 in 3 deals, and they were laddered with their payouts like 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months. So I thought, okay, well, that's kind of staggered out. And their contract said they could extend for 6 months twice. So of those, they should have been paid out a long time ago, and 1.5 has paid out. So the other 1.5 has about $160,000 in principal. But we're now 3 years past when they should have paid out. So they're still paying their front end interest. So in that instance, they would offer 15%, but it was half of it up front, half of it at the back end. And because that's gone on for so long, we've been told, like, you may not even see your back end interest. We might take a small hit on the principal. So I think there's a lot of things in that learning. Like, they really misrepresented themselves. Me and, probably thousands of other members in this education company really trusted that they'd been vetted, the kinds of opportunities and stuff like that. So my learning was that I would never do that much money per deal or per company, and I would never do a split interest again. So all of the deals that I do now are usually no more than $50,000 per deal. I may consider $100,000 per borrower split on 2 different properties, but what I've learned is that a lot of instances, like where they're refining packages of properties, like that's still affects them altogether, right? So now I think just in general, like I try to do like lower amounts, but a higher volume of what that was. So I'd say that's been the worst thing that's happened. They're still paying. I'm confident we'll get the money back eventually, but it's gone on for a long time. So for me, all the other private lending I've done has paid off that investment. But you could imagine, like, people didn't know COVID was coming. Like, what if they really needed that money back and they had no other sources of income or way to pay that, right? So I think that's where people have to be very careful. But then on the successful side, like I just signed my 59th private lending deal, and all the rest have gone really well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And you bring up a point there, right? Like, when you invest, it's got to be money you can afford to carry, and even to some point, you got to be able to afford to lose it.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're using money that is going to be the end all and be all, that can be very serious.
Yeah. Yeah, so I do think diversifying is just extremely important.
In terms of future investments, right? Like, do you think you're going to still continue doing the loans, or do you think you're going to get more into more properties, or are you going to keep it split?
Yeah, definitely both. So I used all the money that I had in my business for investing in properties. And then on the flip side, like I'd use my HELOC for the private lending. I did put in an offer on a 22-unit property across, it's like 22 units across 6 properties. So it was like a package of properties in Cape Breton last June. And the seller felt more comfortable with the other buyer because they had physically seen the property. And obviously you can't just go out for every single time you're putting in an offer. So I would have gone out for due diligence, but they turned it down. And at the time I thought, well, maybe there's a reason for this. Like maybe I have to learn some more things to decide what the best next move is. So in this instance, I put that down payment into some loans for a year just so I could have the time to figure out my next move, but also be making money on it in the meantime. Like I'll make an extra like 60 or 70,000 on that. So my down payment will be bigger now. So ideally, definitely with the cash, I want that in appreciating assets. And then I'd use the HELOC for lending. But whenever I've done podcasts like this, a lot of people don't even know about private lending. And what I found is that when I talk about it, it brings like a few people that are like, how can I do this? And it's literally like it's happened over and over and over again to the point that I was like, I should start keeping track of these people because I'm connected to so many active investors doing things that like I can't do all of those. Like I've done all the deals I can. And as things come to an end, I'll find new opportunities, but there's so many that I can't do them all myself. So I'm like, well, maybe I can connect people, right? So that's kind of led into something that I hadn't expected. And I think my focus ideally would be to find a seat where I can be a GP in a project and I can facilitate some of the capital raising. So I think that would probably be a trajectory like I would like to take. And I think that I'm far more passionate about it, but I feel like it's changed my life. It's changed the life of a lot of people that I'm connected to. And people just don't know how powerful that can be. So I think I would really love to be able to provide those opportunities to people in that way.
Makes total sense. And that's the other thing I was going to get into, joint ventures.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're looking to get into some joint ventures.
Potentially,
and stuff. Yeah. What would you say would be the biggest thing that is concerning?
Yeah.
And what would you do to, in terms of due diligence to make sure you're getting in the right partnership?
Yeah. Okay, so there's one company I had entertained. The concern I had with it was like, if you're going to go burr a big multifamily, you have no cash flow. So you have to know that you're going to have no cash flow on that money for at least a couple of years. So ideally, like I wanted something turnkey, could be fairly passive. Like you have your property manager, so maybe you're managing them a bit. But for the most part, like it's fairly passive and it's cash flowing. But if you're going to take on a multifamily, so say, for example, you buy a property that's worth $1.5 million, they put $500,000 in renos in, well, that property can now be worth $3.5 million. So they would ideally return your capital back, and then they would also refi, so that money's coming to you tax-free. So there's far more potential for a lift on your money. So, I think when you think of building that long-term wealth, there's more potential there because now you're also a partner in, say, like a 20 or 30 unit building. You get your capital back, you get a bunch of tax-free money back on the refi, and it'll start cash flowing. But then you can also continue to just put that money into future opportunities. So there is a company I've spoken to that they have, I think, 8 or 9 properties around the country. So they've got their systems in place. They know what they're doing. Like I'm not just going to go struggle through a burr on my own. So I think there's a lot of value in coming in as the money partner in a situation like that. But you have to be very clear to understand like the time it can take. What's the worst case scenario? Like what if, obviously the market's gone up and down. I think that's a little more specific to residential than commercial. Like the commercial probably hasn't been impacted the way that craziness with residential to some respects. So I think that would probably make sense. Like I personally don't see the value of joint venturing with someone if they're just going to go find a property and hire the property manager. Like I wouldn't give up 50% equity just for that. But if they're going to go and do all of this work that's forcing that appreciation, then I think there's a lot of value in that. So I think you got to talk to their other investors, do your due diligence in that way.
Makes total sense. Love that. So with that being said, in lieu of time, I'm going to get down to the last couple of questions.
Sure.
One is, what would be your advice to someone watching who's thinking of becoming an agent or an investor and they're not sure where to start and they're a little scared? What would you tell them?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that's 2 kind of questions. If you want to get your real estate license, you're looking at obviously quite a bit of time and money to obviously go through the program. Like I think all in all, it was around, $15,000 going through the courses and then your association fees and all of that stuff. So I think if you're considering that, you have to know that there's going to be some investment of that time and money, and it's going to take a little bit of time to build your database, and just find people that you can learn from. Like, I think collaboration and networking in this industry is really important, because you can't necessarily depend on your brokerage to provide that to you. Some will. I think yours probably does, from what I've heard, but there's a lot that there could be some limitations with the training depending on your brokerage's approach. On the investment side, I think, a lot of people think I need all this money to get started. Not necessarily. Like, there's so many people, as like they use other people's money. So there could be ways that you can lean on your network and be like, I found this amazing deal. You need $500,000 to get started. Well, you can take on 5 investors at $100,000 a piece, and then kind of go forward. But I think before you do something like that, you have to educate yourself. So I've joined, I was a part of a real estate education company for 5 years. I'm still with them. I joined a mastermind this past year, and now I've joined like another education company as well. So I've joined a lot. So it's just to learn from what other people are doing so that you can handle things appropriately. Because the last thing you want is to damage your reputation by losing people's money and their investment in you.
Absolutely true. So next, and not last question, but second last question. How do you know you've had a successful day?
I'm really big on my to-do list, so there's nothing better than crossing those things off. So generally, when I start my day, I have certain things that I like to get through. From an agent perspective, usually they would say, like, you want to talk to like 5 or 10 new leads and stuff like that. So for me, it's personally just I set out my objectives for the day, and I just make sure I like manage my time appropriately to get through everything I've planned.
Last question before I go into what I call the lightning round, which is just fun, fast questions.
Okay.
Which is, where do people find you?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram. All my socials, basically Serena Holmes Realtor. And then, as I mentioned, I did publish a book. So that's under Serena Holmes Author for anyone that wants to check that out. And the book's called The Accidental Entrepreneur.
And that's right. I remembered about the book now.
Yeah.
And in fact, I saw it on your profile.
Yeah.
But anybody watching this or listening to this, if you are going to follow me, like my or subscribe, give me a review, I'm going to pick 5 people. I'll pick up the tab. I'll buy the book and send it to you. Just got to follow me, subscribe, like, comment, whichever. Now, to get into the lightning round,
okay.
We're going to be question number 1 is, what is your favorite food?
Oh, gosh. Probably sushi.
Ooh, sushi's good.
Yeah.
Favorite travel spot?
I got married in Thailand, so that's definitely at the top.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Third thing would be favorite book or podcast?
So I really loved Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. I think there's just so much. They should have that in schools. That's how much I think it's got valuable information.
Yeah, that's one thing I think schools are missing is financial education.
Absolutely, yeah.
Last question, but not least. If you had unlimited amount of money, but only 48 hours to spend it, what you spend, you get to keep. What's not spent gets taken away. What would you do?
I'd go buy the block.
Go buy the block. I like that one.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me here. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad that you were here to join me on this podcast.
Sure. Thank you.
Very informative. A lot of great information, and yeah,
Great.
I mean, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
getting in the business and stuff.
Thank you.
If you like what you saw and you want to see some more, subscribe to the link below.